is Prime Time Live. Now Diane Sawyer and Sam Donaldson.
Good evening and welcome again to Prime Time Live. Tonight we would like to ask you to pause with us for a moment and imagine that you live not in the United States of America but in a country far away. Imagine that your country had suffered under acts of almost unimaginable savagery. Imagine that 1 to 2 million of your countrymen had been slaughtered or starved to death, perhaps as many as a quarter of the nation. And then imagine that tonight you believed that the murderers were about to return. If you can do that, then you can imagine what it is to be Cambodian tonight and to endure the torment of the two men you're about to meet.
Diane, before 1969, Cambodia was a fairly peaceful country. People lived simply but fairly well. And then in March of 1969, the United States began bombing Cambodia secretly in order to try to curtail the use of that country's territory as a privileged sanctuary from which North Vietnamese troops were attacking American GIs in South Vietnam. Well, the government of Cambodia and Prince Norodom Sihanouk fell, and Cambodia has never been the same since.
No, it began a season of revenge and bloodshed. And we will begin right now by taking you with us to Cambodia in Southeast Asia, a country that stands at a crossroads tonight. Because this week, the Vietnamese army has pulled out of Cambodia, ending nearly 11 years of occupation. And everyone wonders if that pullout means that the murderers who controlled Cambodia before will take over again. They called themselves the Khmer Rouge, and if you saw the movie The Killing Fields, you'll remember that they were the communist guerrillas who gained control of Cambodia in 1975. Many of them were teenagers taught to follow orders blindly, and they began killing anyone who had an education, a skill, or contact with foreigners. To the Khmer Rouge, thinking was a crime. The movie was the story of a Cambodian named Dith Pran, an assistant to New York Times reporter Sidney Schanberg, who managed to live through that 4-year hell under the Khmer Rouge. And the actor who played Dith Pran was also Cambodian, Dr. Haing Ngor, a physician who had never acted before. He too had faced death and survived. Well, not long ago, Haing Ngor and Dith Pran decided it was time to go back to Cambodia, the first time after their escape in 1979. And we went with them. This is the story of their journey home. As Dith Pran and Haing Ngor saw Cambodia, the plane fell silent. There, out the window, was the homeland that became a grave. Memories of the killing fields. Dith Pran, whose story you saw in the movie, came back to his country with a reporter's notebook and a journalist's mission to report the facts to the world. Haing Ngor, the doctor and actor, came as a witness. 32 of his family had died. A handful of survivors were there to greet him. Childhood friends, and a brother he was seeing for the first time in 15 years. Waiting for Dith Pran was Sidney Schanberg, who was his boss at the New York Times, and still his friend.
He kept everybody waiting for 3 hours. Is that you or me? No.
For Haing and Pran, the journey back began with single steps. First, through what remains of the capital city of Phnom Penh. It was the glamour capital of Asia until the Khmer Rouge began the systematic destruction of everything foreign or modern. Then Pran set out to see if he could find the elegant old home where he once lived with his uncle. He found the old boulevard, now a muddy river of sewage and squalor.
Look at over here that I figured out this must be the Khmer Rouge dismantled all of this.
And all the people who lived in these grand houses probably dead or...
Yeah, most of them.
He studied house after house, looking for a dim outline of his old life under all the decay. The neighbors watched and summoned a woman who had lived here in the old days. She said her father, husband, and all her brothers had been killed by the Khmer Rouge. In Cambodia, people exchange heartache the way the rest of us exchange greetings. Finally, Pran's memory began to stir and guide him down the street toward his old home.
See,
Here you can walk through here.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah. I think this is, look to me, yeah. Yeah.
Here, on this balcony, he watched the bombing and rocket attacks on the city. Here, where he once lived, 4 families with countless children are squeezed into the rooms. The electricity is gone. The books, the furniture, the doors and shutters long since burned as firewood. Pran left knowing that on every street, something or someone would remind him how lucky he and his family were to get out.
Oh, Sydney, you called him to told me in the morning at 12, the black car, you say go get Dith Pran.
This battered man who showed up in front of the hotel is one reason Pran's wife and children are still alive.
1 year.
He was a taxi driver, but because he worked with foreigners, the Khmer Rouge manacled his ankles, pulled his teeth, and drove stakes into his gums. He covered his mouth in embarrassment. 14 years ago, with the Khmer Rouge closing in and the city of Phnom Penh in chaos, that driver searched for Dith Pran to deliver a message from Sydney Schanberg, a message that the final evacuation from the U.S. Embassy was about to begin.
And then Sydney told me that, hey, you go or not now? And I say that I don't want to go. I'd like to stay behind, but please take my family.
As shown here in the movie, Pran's family was airlifted out on the day the U.S. left Cambodia for good. Sydney Schanberg and Pran stayed behind to cover the story.
I think we were a little bit frightened. I don't think we had any notion of what was going to happen. We just kept bucking each other up and keeping our spirits up sort of mutually.
I think I did a right thing, that what I did in April 1975.
For 5 days in April 1975, Sydney Schanberg's stories were virtually the only eyewitness accounts of the collapse of Phnom Penh. Those stories would help earn Schanberg the Pulitzer Prize. Pran took us back to the old telegraph office and found a few of the operators still on the job. This was the place Schanberg had written many of those reports, and Pran made sure the operators somehow got them out to the west.
Sometimes he helped me say, oh, Paris line is not accepted. I say, go to Hong Kong. And sometimes Hong Kong say no. I say, go to Saigon. I say, don't worry, send anywhere as long as get to the New York Times.
Then, on April 17th, the Khmer Rouge took over, and the killing began. 3 days later, Schanberg and Pran had to say goodbye. Schanberg, a Westerner, was given safe passage out, but Pran was Cambodian. It was too late. He had to stay. And when you walked down and out the gate, what were you thinking?
Well, just pray, and I say, please, don't let the Khmer Rouge know who I am.
Pran didn't know then that across town, another Cambodian, a rich young doctor, was about to have his first encounter with the Khmer Rouge. Haing Ngor was in the middle of surgery. A patient was on the table. He knew when the Khmer Rouge walked in, there was only one way to survive.
The Khmer Rouge get in by the front door, handle AK-47, and press my temple with AK-47. They asked me that, you are doctor? I said, no, I'm not doctor. The doctor just left by the back door around 2 minutes ago.
And then?
And then I had to tell my colleague, my friends, we have to leave that room.
I mean, he had been opened for surgery, and you just left.
Yes. I feel very sorry that I left one patient behind me, and that patient died on the table.
But there was no other way?
No, because if I stayed there and finished my job, I could not believe that the Khmer Rouge did not kill me.
And so Haing and Pran joined 2.5 million other terrified Cambodians in a forced march out of the cities into the countryside. They became prisoners in a national gulag. They labored 14 hours a day building dams to irrigate the rice fields. But it was pointless, since the engineers had all been silenced or killed. The dams were doomed to fail.
Well, did the dams you were building work? Were they ever going to make any difference?
It's not really, because what they do, they just try to make
Straight line?
Straight line, and you wouldn't believe some place like a chessboard.
Pran caught malaria, infections, and nearly starved. His ration was only a spoonful of rice a day. He searched desperately for anything to eat.
We eat rice field rat and mouse and insects, cricket, grasshopper, and anything that you can find.
Even all these years later, an edible weed in a rice paddy looks like an old friend.
Here's another one. I found it. See that? You see, that's how lucky that Cambodia. But this is eat. You can cook or you can eat raw.
When Pran was captured foraging for food, his young captors, 14 and 15 years old, took pleasure in the punishment.
And you say they loved to beat you?
Yes, especially the Khmer Rouge girl.
Why?
Well, they believe very fast. They say I'm a traitor because I stole rice from the community.
And not far away, Haing Ngor was suffering too.
I notice your hand when you're talking.
Yeah,
They cut off your finger.
yeah. Because the Khmer Rouge did not allow us to have any food inside the house.
And they did that because you
Because so that I go out to find something to eat.
He was taken to a prison camp like this one. He saw pregnant women stabbed in the belly with bayonets, starving people chained on torture beds. A prisoner's sketch brought his nightmare back.
They hang me up like Jesus Christ, and the Khmer Rouge set on the fire on the bottom for 3 nights, 4 days. No drink, no food. I said, before you do anything else, please give me a drink and then shot me. Enough. And the Khmer Rouge said, I'm big mouth. And they kicked me like balloon by 5 young kids, Khmer Rouge. Kicked me like balloon. And then they put a plastic bag on my head and tied it on my neck. And I said, oh God, the next minute I would die the same torture.
There were 18 others, side by side with Haing Ngor. Only 5 survived. Haing's wife, Hoi, was the reason he survived. She nursed him, sacrificed her food for him. 1 year later, complications set in during childbirth.
No medical equipment, no medicines, no everything, even food. How to save her life?
Haing knew there was a slim possibility he could operate with a knife and save her, but that would reveal he was a doctor. They would both be killed, so he did nothing. His wife died in his arms. After his wife died, Haing Ngor made his break for freedom, through the jungle into Thailand. A few miles away, Dith Pran was also deciding to escape. The movie recreated his run for freedom, his first sight of the killing fields. Rice paddies filled with the bones of millions of Cambodians. He made it out alone. His father, his nieces and nephews starved. His sister-in-law shot. His 3 brothers executed. In all, half of his native village of Siem Reap had been slaughtered by the Khmer Rouge. Before he left Cambodia, Pran went back to that village looking for survivors. A nephew, a sister, cousins, neighbors. His aunt.
There's only one left.
Together, they walked the half-mile to the cemetery. After 10 years, he was able to give his family a Buddhist burial. And then, near the outskirts of the village, Dith Pran, survivor of the Cambodian Holocaust, stopped and asked the questions millions of ghosts whisper on the wind.
I lost so many of my relatives. I don't know which killing field
Maybe this one. What we do? This is just one. I'm sure there are thousands of killing fields. How can you bring the killer back in to share the power? I can't stand, I can't understand.
And joining us now in our audience, Haing Ngor and Dith Pran. Haing, did the trip back change your nightmares? Do you still have them?
Yes, I still have always nightmare because I forgot those kind of things that between my wife and I.
Let me ask you about that again, because you were faced into a choice no one in the world could endure having to face. There was a procedure with an ordinary knife. You might have tried to save her, but you would have both been killed, so you didn't. How do you live with that?
That time I would like to save her life very much because she's the one who saved my life. And very hard to make a decision that time. If I save her life, did I think myself survived after I saved her?
But would you make that decision again? Or would you try something, anything to save her, whatever the risk?
I try my best to ask the high-rank Khmer official and leader at that village, and that I want to bring her to hospital at Battambang province, around 12 kilometers from my home village.
And they said no?
They said no.
Let me turn now to you, if I can, Pran. You have called for a Nuremberg trial for the leaders of the Khmer Rouge. Are you going to get it? Do you really believe you'll ever get it?
Well, I think the Khmer Rouge should be brought to justice, and the United Nations should pass the resolution, and the people who do a genocide, who are responsible in genocide, should not return to the power.
Do you think if you were European, if this were the European Holocaust, instead of an Asian Holocaust, that you would have had the trial already?
Yes, long time ago, if a European. But this is because Asian, because Cambodian is a small country, and we far away from Europe and from United Nations.
Do you think civil war is inevitable now?
Yes, the civil war will increase, and I'm hoping that all the Cambodian soldiers will refuse to fight and to kill each other.
We thank both of you for letting us go back to Cambodia with you and for coming here tonight. We thank you. Before we leave this subject, Sam, I think people sitting at home probably would say to themselves, they know which side the United States is on in this policy debate about the Khmer Rouge and whether they should come back. They might be surprised because in a kind of unseemly diplomatic straddle, the United States is in the position right now of saying it does not want the Khmer Rouge back in the government, but it supports the coalition that includes the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah, well, Washington didn't mean to get itself in this fix. The idea was to keep the communists in Cambodia, the Vietnamese communists, from staying there forever, to try to drive them out. So yes, the United States supported the coalition, headed by Prince Norodom Sihanouk, the very man who was destabilized back in 1970. The idea was that Sihanouk would take over, be the head of the coalition, run the government. But now with the coalition poised to come back, everyone sees that it's the Khmer Rouge that has the guns, they have the power, and the fear is that they'll take over.
Oh, I know. The argument is being made that the Khmer Rouge should be incorporated into the government and that will civilize them. But the fact of the matter is they are battle-hardened, jungle-toughened revolutionaries. That's their definition. And the idea that they might somehow become happy bureaucrats seems preposterous to a lot of people.
Everyone recognizes this. Vice President Quayle said just yesterday that we don't want to see the Khmer Rouge take over, but how are you going to prevent it? Well, the best bet seems to be to put pressure on China. China backs the Khmer Rouge. If we can get Beijing to withdraw this backing, then there's going to be a more even playing field. And if that doesn't work, the idea is that the Vietnamese will go back into Cambodia. Because I tell you, Diane, U.S. troops aren't going there.
We should say also, before we leave this subject, that a symbol of the unease that American diplomats feel about all of this in the State Department is that we ask a number of them to come on this program tonight and talk with us. they all declined.
They're reassessing policy. As well they might.
As well, they probably need to. We'll be back in just a moment.